June 25, 2023. I'll remember that date till my last breath, a date that inaugurated the strangest and most terror-inducing summer of my life. I had driven into the heart of Appalachia, surrounded by the sylvan spectacle of untouched forests, jagged peaks, and rippling streams. The natural beauty of the region, usually comforting, somehow felt foreboding that day. My grandfather's cabin was my destination, an inherited property that seemed lost in time. It was tucked away in an obscure part of Kentucky, shrouded by a dense forest of ancient oak and pine, where cell service was just as elusive as the deer that pranced in the wilderness. My intention was to find solitude, finish the novel I'd been struggling with for years. I had no idea I was also about to stumble into a chilling, psychological maze. My childhood summers were filled with memories of this place, an amalgamation of the scent of pine and wood smoke, my grandfather's baritone narrating folk tales by the fire, the echoing laughter that got absorbed by the thick, mysterious forest. Yet, that day as I pulled into the gravel driveway, the cabin, though just as I remembered it, seemed almost unrecognizable, almost as if it had a newfound aura of solemnity. Stepping out of my car, the once comforting smell of damp earth and pine needles filled my nostrils, and sent an unexpected shiver down my spine. I approached the cabin, its wooden facade aged yet sturdy, a testament to the days long past. The key, still hanging under the loose stone by the porch just like my grandfather used to leave it, felt unusually cold against my skin. Turning it in the lock, the cabin door creaked open, revealing a time capsule that held fragments of my past. But something was wrong. The air was too still, almost suffocating. Each creak of the aged wood beneath my feet echoed like a haunting melody through the empty cabin. I tried to shrug off the eerie sensation, reminding myself that I was here for a reason: solitude, peace, a place to write. Once settled in, I spent the rest of the day airing out the rooms, stacking firewood for the stone hearth, and arranging my papers and books in the study, a small room with a single window that framed the vast, undisturbed forest. As night fell, the forest's usual evening symphony of insects and wildlife was oddly muted. As I stared out into the dark, I felt a pang of unease. The tall silhouettes of trees, a sight I found enchanting as a child, appeared ominous and menacing in the moonlight. In the quietude of the cabin, the only sound that filled the rooms was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the living room, its rhythmic tick-tock doing nothing to alleviate the sense of disquiet growing within me. "First night jitters," I said aloud, trying to convince myself that it was the unfamiliarity of being alone in an old cabin that was playing tricks on my mind. And just as I was about to surrender to the exhaustion of the day, I heard a faint scratching noise from beneath the cabin floor. The thin veil of rationality that I had clung onto began to shatter, giving way to a creeping dread. But little did I know, this was just the beginning of my descent into a terror I had never known before. The chilling secrets of the cabin and its surroundings were yet to unfold. Days turned into a week and then into a fortnight. Each passing day was no different from the one preceding it, marked by an eerie silence that shrouded the cabin, an unsettling feeling of being watched, and the inexplicable scratching noise that seemed to come from beneath the cabin floor, now a constant, dissonant soundtrack to my stay. Yet my rational mind continued to dismiss the unease. I blamed the rustling leaves for the imagined whispering, the creaking cabin for the footsteps I thought I heard in the dead of the night, and the gnawing mice for the relentless scratching noise. All the while, my writing lay forgotten, my creative mind held captive by a pervasive sense of dread that I couldn't shake off. One day, while trying to fight the mounting terror, I decided to take a walk through the surrounding woods, a feeble attempt to reclaim the sense of wonder these woods held for me as a child. But the once vibrant forest, which used to echo with life, felt eerily desolate and still. The leaves rustled with an almost sentient intent, the air heavy with an unseen threat. Suddenly, I stumbled upon a peculiar sight. A circle of ancient, gnarled trees, their barks etched with symbols I couldn't recognize. In the middle, a large stone stained with what seemed like, no, it couldn't be, but it certainly looked like old dried blood. I felt a chill run down my spine. A terrifying realization began to dawn on me. Perhaps the cabin's peculiarities weren't all in my mind. That evening, as I returned to the cabin, the disquiet that had clung to me since the moment I arrived seemed to have intensified. The ominous tick-tock of the grandfather clock greeted me, as if mocking my futile attempts to debunk the horrors that the cabin held. I decided to confront my fears. Grabbing a flashlight and a crowbar, I ventured into the cold, damp cellar underneath the cabin. My heartbeat echoed in my ears as I pried open a section of the old wooden floor from where the scratching seemed to be emanating. Underneath, I found an old, rusty box. Its iron exterior was cold and clammy to touch, almost as if it held the cabin's chill within it. With trembling hands, I slowly opened the box. Inside, I found a weathered leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age, and a small amulet made of bone and stones. The journal belonged to my grandfather. The first entry was dated June 25, 1953. The same date, but 70 years ago. I stared at the date, the eerie coincidence sending chills down my spine. I began to read, and with each passing entry, my blood ran colder, the terror of what I was discovering far surpassing my initial fears. My grandfather's words painted a horrifying tale, a secret history of the cabin, and a malignant entity that resided within its woods. The same entity, it seemed, that had now turned its gaze upon me. I became consumed with the words etched on those aged pages, each sentence a stroke of dread painting a nightmare I wished I could wake from. My grandfather's accounts detailed an entity, a malignant force that dwelt within the woods and, according to the local folklore, was tied to the cabin itself. My once beloved grandfather had been part of something nefarious. Rituals, dark sacrifices, and a pact with an unseen entity. The ghastly details made my skin crawl. What horrified me even more was the amulet, its purpose, as written in the journal, to keep the entity at bay. But for how long? Was the entity's restlessness the source of the haunting noises and the feeling of being watched? That night I barely slept. The eerie silence of the cabin was now an ominous lullaby. My eyes kept drifting to the amulet and the journal, now sitting on the mantel above the fireplace, a chilling testament to my grandfather's secret past. The next morning, I woke up to find the amulet missing. Panic washed over me. I turned the cabin upside down looking for it, my frantic search proving fruitless. With the amulet gone, was I now at the mercy of this malevolent force? As the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, the woods surrounding the cabin came alive, not with the sweet serenade of the wild, but with a symphony of unsettling whispers. The scratching noise beneath the cabin floor grew louder, more frantic, as though something was trying to claw its way out. And then, in the deafening silence that followed, I heard a low growl echoing from the depths of the forest, a sound so primal that it froze my blood. I peered out the window and, in the dim light of the moon, I saw them, the shadows. They moved fluidly between the trees, a horrifying dance of darkness. They were coming closer. The last line of my grandfather's journal echoed in my mind. "Beware, for once the amulet is lost, the watchers of the woods will awaken." Desperation began to claw at me as I searched for the amulet once more, tearing through the cabin with a newfound frenzy. Suddenly, the grandfather clock chimed, the loud gong resonating through the cabin, marking the arrival of midnight. The sound was followed by a deafening silence, as if the world outside had ceased to exist. And then, a knock echoed through the stillness. It was coming from the front door. I stared at the wooden barrier separating me from whatever horrors lay beyond. The knocks turned into heavy thuds. They were here. The watchers of the woods were at my door. The cabin, my sanctuary, was under siege, and all I had for protection were my grandfather's journal and my failing courage. As the final protective barriers of denial crumbled, I was left facing the horrifying truth. The dread I felt was not mere paranoia. It was real. It was standing on my doorstep, scratching beneath my floors, whispering from the woods, watching me. My stay in the cabin was not just a retreat but a confrontation with the horrors of my family's past. But was there any escape? Would I ever see the world beyond the woods again? The chilling grip of fear tightened around me as I looked at the door, waiting for it to burst open, waiting for the watchers of the woods. There was a moment of deathly silence before the first splintering crash against the door. I stumbled backwards, the pounding of my heart echoing in my ears. Fear, raw and visceral, coursed through my veins as I retreated further into the cabin, my eyes never leaving the quivering wooden door. The cabin groaned around me, the wind outside howling like a wounded beast. As the door buckled and warped, the scratching noise beneath the cabin floor grew even more frantic. It was as if all the terrors my grandfather had written about were closing in, all at once. I had no other choice. I could only wait and endure. And as I did, I found myself drawn back to the journal. It was all I had left. As the pounding on the door continued, I flipped through the yellowed pages again, a desperate search for something, anything that could help me. Then, almost as if fate intervened, a folded piece of paper slipped from the journal onto my trembling hands. It was a sketch, detailed and carefully drawn, of the strange circle of trees I had discovered in the woods. The same gnarled trees, the same symbols, and in the middle, the stone. But there was more. The sketch depicted the amulet, not lost or missing, but purposefully placed in the middle of the circle on the blood-stained stone. I stared at the sketch, a spark of understanding flickering through the panic. The amulet wasn't lost, it had been taken. Could it be possible? Could the entity itself have taken the amulet to the stone? To the heart of its ancient dwelling? Was this how it intended to break free completely? Armed with this newfound realization, I made my choice. I would retrieve the amulet. It was a desperate plan, but the alternative was to wait for the inevitable inside the cabin. As I stepped out into the open, the wind whipped around me, carrying whispers that weren't just wind. I could feel their eyes on me, the watchers in the woods, their presence like a physical weight. But I was past caring. The terror had numbed me, and in its place, a grim determination had taken hold. I moved towards the circle of gnarled trees, every shadow seeming to shift and undulate, every whisper seeming to grow louder. But I didn't falter. I reached the stone, my heart hammering in my chest. And there it was. The amulet, just as the sketch showed, lying innocently on the stone as though it had always been there. Gathering the last bit of my courage, I reached out and grabbed it. A sudden hush fell over the woods. The wind dropped, and even the moon seemed to hold its light. I clutched the amulet, feeling its strange warmth seep into my skin, a stark contrast to the cold dread that had filled me. The sense of being watched, the suffocating fear, the scratching beneath the cabin, all came to a sudden stop. A slow, creeping sense of relief washed over me. Had I appeased the entity? Had I broken its hold over the cabin, over me? As I trudged back towards the cabin, the woods were just woods, the cabin was just a cabin, no longer the monstrous dwelling of my fears. The entity, it seemed, was at bay once again. The horrifying ordeal was over, but the chilling memories and my grandfather's legacy would forever haunt me. My retreat turned nightmare was finally at an end. The next morning, I left the cabin, vowing never to return. I had walked into the heart of Appalachia to find solitude, to find inspiration for my novel. I came away with a story, I'll write a chilling tale of ancient entities and a haunted cabin, a tale I would carry with me for the rest of my days.